called in to do. So this divine right of kings was being threatening the kings. And so the Englishmen, these various documents, they were working this out, fleshing this out, how to protect the liberties of the people. Magna Carta in the 1628, there was a petition of right that was drafted. Rights of the people petition. In 1641, there was a grand remonstrance. And in 1689, the English Bill of Rights. So now these Englishmen had spent several hundred years establishing these as rights of the people to protect and safeguard their liberties as Englishmen. But what happened to the colonists? The king and the parliament, the legislature in England, reneged on all that. They failed to protect the rights of the Englishmen in the colonies. I mean, these things were their right as Englishmen, these protections and their liberties. And the king and the parliament simply refused to protect them and even began aggressions against them, which were violations of their rights as Englishmen. So I've always in the past said, that the colonists weren't in rebellion. They merely had charters and contracts that were not being honored. And when somebody breaks a contract, then you're released from that. If they violate the terms of the contract, then you're no longer bound by your term. So that, I always said that, but it's deeper than that. The English government was violating their rights as Englishmen, and the government was supposed to protect their rights as Englishmen. So, before God, they have we'll read the Declaration of Independence, as they make their case and they state it before a watching world. Okay? So let's listen to what they're having to say, knowing this context.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having, in direct object, the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining, in the meantime, exposed to all the danger of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriation of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the powers of our government, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has advocated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attention to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts made by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. And we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. And that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Hooray!
All right.
I got 3. I got 8. It was rich on me. Oh, it was.
So last year, I asked a couple questions. You might remember. What would you pledge your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor for? Or to? Heard some good words about pledging ourselves recently, making commitments, how important that is. But I mean, we kind of talked about that last year, but pledging your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor, this sacred honor. Their honor was sacred, even above their life and their fortune. Anyway, that was last year. I also asked the question, I'm testing your memory here for those who are here. Remember the question, what's the difference between steadfast and stubborn? Anybody remember that one?
Connie's steadfast and I'm stubborn.
Yeah, I'm not sure we covered it that way last time. In many respects, it seems to me that if you think a person is wrong, they're being stubborn. If you think they're right, they're merely being steadfast. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, otherwise there's probably not much difference between the two. So, we could be being steadfast, faithful to what the Lord has told us, to what the Lord has commanded us. And in somebody else's eyes, we're being stubborn. Okay? Or vice versa. Got another question this time. Because, last year, you remember back the political situation at the time last year we met? If you want to, if it's not too painful to think back, things weren't looking too good ahead of the elections. Remember all that? And, like who do you vote for between a rock and a hard place kind of thing. Well, question, does God work in a mixture? In other words, does God work with people and call people and appoint people to things when they're maybe less than righteous or less than worthy or not the most ideal example you'd like to see? When has he ever not worked in a mixture, right? Mm-hmm. With us. When has he ever not? That's the world we live in. He always works in a mixture. And does he only appoint people to do things for him that are the most holy and righteous or godly or the people we would most look up to?
No.
So, we had quite a surprise in the elections last fall, which is hard to explain except for the hand of God, really. So I recently heard something that I thought was pretty interesting, a parallel between what happened in our country with that election, our current president, and a character in the Bible by the name of Jehu. Anybody remember Jehu?
Yep.
Jehu. okay, who actually Elijah, after he had to go around with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, you know, the 400 prophets of Baal and all that. By the way, you know what Elijah's name means, right? Hebrew, Elijah. My God is Yahweh. Yahweh, my God. So when he was on Mount Carmel and he said, you call on the name of your God, and I'll call on the name of Yahweh. My God is Yahweh. That was his name. So the prophets of Baal called up the name of their God. He called on, you know, the name of the God of Israel. And so we know all that happened. And when he came off the mountain, the Lord, and he goes and runs off to the wilderness and all that, and the Lord sent him back to anoint Hazael, king of Syria, Jehu, king of Israel, and Elisha, the prophet, to follow after him. So Jehu was brought in at that time, but a little later, Elisha actually sent somebody to anoint Jehu as king, specifically for the purpose of what? What's his job? Why does God want Jehu as king? He's got a job to do.
Drain the swamp.
To clear out the house of Ahab. Which really, what he was doing was draining the swamp. Right? So I'm of the mind that the president we have now, this was God's hand, just like he said, to drain the swamp. Now, Jehu was kind of a crazy guy. He was kind of wild. He was not the guy you would want your kids to model, your boys to model, you know, after. He wasn't. But God called him and called him for a purpose. Now, the sad part about Jehu is that he didn't follow the ways of the Lord. He did what the Lord wanted him to do as far as draining the swamp, the house of Ahab. But then it says that he did not follow the Lord in all his ways. Okay? But did that mean the Lord didn't use it? Obviously not. Now, another little interesting thing in that story, I mean, you can see a lot of parallels already when I'm talking about our president, you know, kind of a crazy guy. He's not the guy you just want to model, you know, life to your kids. But it's like the Lord had miraculously brought him in to drain the swamp. And whether he'll succeed or not, isn't really the point. But Jehu, he was going down the road, and there was a guy named Jehonadab, I think it was. Now, if you know about Jehonadab, he was a son of Rechab, one of the Rechabites. And without going into it, their family had stayed faithful to the Lord. I mean, they walked with the Lord, and in their family, their sacred honor to this day, they walked after the Lord. So along comes Jehu, and Jehu says, "Are you with me? Is your heart as my heart, Jehonadab?" Now here's Jehonadab. You would want God to restore righteousness to your land of Israel, right? But Jehu, is he the guy that's going to do it? What do you say? You know, Jehonadab said, yes, it is, because he saw the hand of God on Jehu and what he was going to do. And he joins him in that sense, even though Jehu didn't walk with the Lord, especially in later days. He walked away from the Lord in a lot of things. So I feel a lot like that right now. It's like, you know, the Lord created something in our land which is really precious right now. Our president's not our savior. In fact, I'll go further than that. The federal government is not going to save us. They are the problem. We read the Declaration and we wonder what's different now than it was then. Are they protecting our liberties? Our God-given, life, liberty, and property, and the inalienable rights that God has given us?
No, Evelyn.
I mean, our liberty to speak freely is being curtailed. Just for one simple thing, taking a stand against ungodliness is very unpopular, and you can really suffer for it nowadays. And are they protecting us? No. Okay. But anyway, the federal government isn't our savior anyway. No matter who's president, they're the problem, if anything. But what I think God has given us here is a window of opportunity. He stymied the solidifying of evil across our nation. He put a hitch in their plan. He interrupted it, that progression down that road, to give us a window of opportunity. I mean, I like looking at it this way. This makes sense to me. The following question is, and granted, he works in a mixture, which means it can include all of us. But the question is, what do we do with this opportunity? From last year to now, it seems to me, God just like parted the waters and gave us some time to speak His truth, to walk closely with Him and bear testimony, to share the gospel, to stand for right and wrong. You know, and I'm trying to really be really short here. The ice cream's waiting. In Judges chapter 2, the Israel, when they came into Glen Canaan, they didn't totally wipe out all the pagan worship and stuff like that they were supposed to. And God criticizes them for that. And He says three interesting things. He says, number one, you know, you're going to suffer because of your sin. Number two, I'm leaving them there in your midst to test and try you. I mean, they're going to like to be thrown in your side, but they're to test and try you. But number three, He says something which is a little different. He says, also, so that all those people who have grown up that didn't know war, that they will know war. Because there's a whole generation of people now, all the older people have died off. Joshua and all the elders have died off. And these new people have never known war. And God wants them to know war. Isn't that kind of odd? Except that, when you remember, the battle still continues, right? The enemy of our souls is even, some may feel, getting desperate because it's time is drawing close to Him. If we aren't engaged in the battle for righteousness, in the battle for the truth of God, okay, I mean, He still wants us to know war. But now, through Jesus, we know better how to fight that war. But we got to engage. And so here, we got this window of opportunity in our country. And I just see, God looking down to His people saying, okay, you're my team, you're my army, you're my people, my sons and daughters. And it's like, what are we going to do? You going to step up? So I'll just finish saying, obviously Washington's federal government, president, and all that's not our salvation. I'm so excited when we gather like this because the strength of our community and the strength of our family life and community life and stuff like this around here is so good. Why? Because of all you guys. We are God's people, and as we walk with God, just do the things He gave us to do, raising our families, being a neighbor to each other. You know, like we said before, we had the fires. God gave us a fire drill. He gave us a fire so that we could practice what He wants us doing. So as times get hard, we're used to this. We've had some dry runs at it, right? These are just helpful to us to realize how to engage and to be conscious of the need to engage. But so much, I have an article in here about homeschooling, that in spite of everything being against homeschooling, there's no organization, there's no government program, there's no funding, there's nobody out there trying to get people to homeschool. Why is it so popular and growing, and why is it so successful? It's because grassroots, God's people doing what God put on their heart to do, right at home. Simple things that have been foundational and so important from the very beginning. If we don't know how to live godly in our homes and families, we don't understand what the family of God is about. And we aren't presenting the picture of the family of God. Because he gave us the family as a picture of the heavenly reality. So right here at home, we have, excellent opportunity just to start living those things out. I'm just making the point that so much of our salvation, of what God has for us to do in doing the work of his kingdom, is not out there. It's not Washington. It's what we're doing right here. I just want to encourage you, because you guys are always so encouraging to me. That's why we have this kind of community. Because we're all walking with the Lord and doing what he gives us to do. And man, that's our strength. That's our testimony. It may very well be, in the near future, make this place a huge refuge to a lot of people. At the very least, it will make it a light set on a stand, of witness and testimony. Okay? Anyway, so you guys encourage me, and I just want to encourage you guys with that. So, anybody else want to make a comment or two before we dig in? You're free to. And I'll offer up another prayer, and just for our country while we're here. But any comment? Encouragement? Admonition? Observation? Amen? Okay, well I'll close with a prayer, but I want to just allow a few minutes, and if there's maybe a couple other people that just the Lord has got something on your heart to lift up in prayer, Thanksgiving, just appreciation, intercession or something, just briefly. We'll give a few minutes in case two or three people want to do that, and then I'll close. So.
My prayer has been for the unity of the brethren in this valley. I see so much judgment, condemnation, separation, and my heart, I feel, has been called to try and accept our brothers. Anyone that names the name of Christ is on our side. Even if they don't understand their Bible, they don't know where they're coming from, they're full of error in our opinion, we're not going to be effective if we're divided. And that's the enemy's greatest strength, is dividing us. So I just pray for unity among the brethren, and peace, and acceptance, and not acceptance of error, but holding up the unity over the error, and working through the error with each other with admonishment and encouragement and discussion and study. But we're never going to all come to the same thinking, even on the Bible. So let us work together and support one another, no matter what, as a reflection of Christ and his prayer for unity.
Dear Father in heaven, I thank you for this country that has been the cradle of freedom. We love our freedom, but most of all, I thank you that we've had the freedom to spread the gospel, not only here, but around the world. And may that continue as you see fit. Amen.
God Most High, we do acknowledge you and thank you and praise you for your hand on our land and its history, for your purposes in it, even until this day, and for us and our families and our opportunity to live here around this time, this point in the history, and be your people in the midst of it. But we acknowledge you, God, and we praise you for it, and we thank you for it, first and foremost. But also, we thank you that you aren't disturbed by the evil. You aren't thwarted by the evil. not even depressed by it. But in the midst of things, even in the midst of mixture,